Good morning, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. It is indeed a pleasure this morning to be with you one more time to discuss a very important topical matter. Now, I had actually made a video day before yesterday and just could not find it on my computer. I don't know what tricks the computer is playing with me or what tricks my eyes are playing with me. So let me redo the video that I should have published yesterday, that I should have uploaded yesterday, but could not have because when I sought the video that I had made previously, that's day before yesterday, I noticed that I could not find it, right? So let me go. Now, today, we are going to be looking at the fact that we see a rise in populist governments, right? Governments which are talking about nationalism, national security, and that we should prioritize nation building whilst ignoring globalization. Because since the 1990s, we have been hearing much about globalization and that we need all these international institutions and that we must submit to them because if we adhere to the tenets of globalization, then we are going to reap the financial and the socioeconomic benefits. Now, the world has witnessed, particularly since the beginning of the 21st century, that globalization has not worked for their distinct economies, right? And they have been waging protests. In fact, if you read Chalmers Johnson's book, The Sorrows of Empire, in chapter 9, you will see where he outlined all the principles of globalization and how this globalization process has failed time and time again. Now, he did mention also in the book, cited by a number of other authors, that there was a huge protest in Seattle, Washington, in the United States, about globalization, right? And people were there, trying to let their voices be heard that globalization was the wrong move to make. Because as we have suggested here on this channel before, whatever policies you have for other countries, including third world countries, will end up being policies for the United States of America. So people in the United States, particularly after Bill Clinton's North American Free Trade Agreement, right, the NAFTA agreement, they realized that their jobs were being shifted, right, to other countries where you had cheaper laborers. In the 1990s also, you also witnessed jobs from the United States going to China and other East Asian countries, right? So you find that the United States was doing a lot of outsourcing because it outsourced jobs where it could have reaped bigger or more obscene profits, right? And that is the whole essence of globalization, that you go wherever you can find cheap labor or even free labor, because that was what the system of slavery was built on. They say it's free, but it's enslaved, right? Labor, right? It's an enslaved market. I don't call it the free market. I call it the enslaved market, right? Because even if you are being paid something, if you listen to what some of the documentaries in where people are working for some of these large corporate donors, these large corporate corporations, you will see, and I'm saying multinational corporations, that is, right? You will see that people are just earning, right, a measly wage or measly salary, right? So this is not about free market as they have suggested. It it smacks of slavery. It reminds us, it is reminiscent of what happened during the process of slavery. Now, during slavery also, they call it the free market, right? And slaves were free to go or, wherever they needed to have gone. But we know that there were also restrictions on, what slaves could go to what country, etc., 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 etc. I mean, Britain and for a long time had a strong arm over the slave trade, right? And that country wouldn't allow slaves to be sent to some countries, or if they're sent, they have to pay. They controlled the system. Well, they could be sent, but they controlled the trafficking of the slaves from one particular country to the other, right? So it's something that we need to bear in mind and that things have not changed that much, and that very soon we might find ourselves also being enslaved, and or children particularly, and grandchildren. Now, one of the things I wanted to suggest here is that right throughout the Western world, right, particularly in the press, right, we are seeing where there's a war being waged against right-wing populist governments. Now, we have a situation in our politics today where we have the extreme right, right, and we also have the far or extreme left, right? Now, the extreme right, they're suggesting that we should leave the markets up and the markets will take care of our economics, right? Because governments should have limited role in the economy and in other aspects and spheres of our financial and sociocultural life, right? They're saying that government should not really have their hands on many things. Now, to some extent, if we were living in a perfect world, that should be true, right? If capitalism was operating under the context that it's, a value-based, ethics-based system, financial system, economic system, then we could, yes, say that government should have limited role in what happens from day to day. But that was essentially the same sort of theoretical framework that governed the free trade, that's transatlantic slave trade, right? In America, for example, during the Civil War. And that is why you hear Nikki Haley saying that slavery was not the root cause of the war, because the whole root cause she suggested was because the states wanted their rights. They were right-wing and they wanted their rights. At the time, the Democrats, and those were the Democrats, right, of the South, they wanted their right to be able to slave human beings, right, to peddle the lives of human beings. That's what they wanted the right to do, because they think that government should not be engaged in that sort of industry, right? Even though the government was technically involved, right? Because the government was the one who liaised with the financial slave masters and overlords to make laws, right? To adjudicate the whole process of slavery, right? And, and they actually formed laws, right? To keep that system of slavery intact, right? So the fact of the matter is that we can never think that government is separate from financial, what should I say now, from financial influence, right? Because from time immemorial, the two have always been merged, right? Because money always runs the show, right? And we need to understand that wherever there is lots of money, you're going to have lots of power. And when men have power, they wield it over even their own children or families, right? So we have to understand that and do not think that politics is separate of finances, what happens on Wall Street or what happens in London, wherever those aristocrats or those financial powerhouses are located. Now, we hear a lot about Donald Trump and that he is a singular and major threat to Western democracy, specifically the United States democracy. But does Donald Trump represent a singular and major threat to Western democracies? That's the question. And we need to ask that question for ourselves, because I do not think that Donald Trump, and when we say Donald Trump, we're talking about Donald Trump and his followers, because a lot of times we hear Donald Trump, but you must understand that Donald Trump has a base and he has followers, and he is articulating the sentiments, right, of his followers. Remember that Donald Trump is not suffering, right? Whether or not he's a billionaire or millionaire, it does not matter. Donald Trump and his family have enough money to take care of themselves for a long, long time, right? Many people in America are suffering and they do not have the wherewithal to take care of their families for a long time. Even for now, many people are suffering. They're living day to day, right? The studies have suggested that many Americans, if they had a health emergency, could not find $500. right, to be able to take care of that medical emergencies. And we do know, particularly if you don't have health insurance, that is going to require lots more than $500, right, if you have a health emergency in the United States, right? You're talking about a society that is indebted, right, that has hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, right, personal debt, right? So when we talk about growth, the United States economy growing, and we're going to look at the book again, The Retreat in Western Liberalism. I need to be able to highlight these important points that Edward Luce has intimated, right? Because these are the points we need to learn and to understand what is happening in the Western Hemisphere, what is happening in the Western world. Because as Henry Luce, not Henry, but Edward Luce, as Henry Luce is one of the guys who actually believed in American imperialism, and he wrote the New American Century, right, by Henry Luce. We should probably read that document. Very interesting, where these guys from the 1930s, 40s were actually suggesting that America should be, even before the Soviet Union collapsed, right, should be the preeminent superpower in the world, right? So from early on, America had plans for full spectrum dominance, right? So this is nothing that is new, or what you probably would deem a conspiracy theory. If you should read that document, The New American Century by Henry Luce, you definitely would learn a lot. But let's now divert. It was not Henry Luce I'm talking about with the retreat in Western liberalism. I'm talking about Edward Luce, and he's a British journalist, an economist, a historian, right, and a political commentator. And in his book, right, Retreat in Western Liberalism, he highlights the fact that the ways of thinking in Western society, do not merge with the reality. That Western people tend to think outside of reality. That means that we are delusional, right? We think that just by saying that we are Westerners, right? And particularly those who consider themselves to be whites, there's something inherently powerful in those words, being Western and white, right? And that will preserve the civilization. And that is not going to happen, right? It is values and it is adherence to the truth that will help us to live and for our civilizations to last and to prosper. All right, outside of that. One of the reasons why the United States experiment almost ended in 1860, in the 1860s, right, 1861 to 1865, when the US Civil War was being waged, is that it had to confront that slavery was a moral issue and that it was immoral, right? They had to confront that fact. Another fact they had to confront is that Blacks are not inferior. People of African descent are not inferior. They had to eventually put them into the war, right? In fact, the South, which were the last ones to do it, wanted to include Blacks in the war, right? In the war against slavery, because they realized that, they had lost a lot of soldiers. The Northerners also, it's until Blacks came into the war, even for the North, that they started to gain some sort of victory before they were losing the war, right? The Northerners were actually losing the war before Blacks were actually included in that war. So they had to confront two things. And these were not, we think these are convenient facts, but for them, these were highly inconvenient facts, because science and all of the other ideologies, including religious ideologies, had suggested that Black people by nature are inferior. And for them to have accepted that erroneous ideology and philosophical framework, right, it must have taken a lot of energy. It must have taken a lot of courage, I should say, to eventually say that, Blacks are not inferior as we thought, right? It was difficult, right? Because if you have grown up with some sort of thinking for hundreds of years, and then you have to change your mindset, right? It is something very difficult to do, right? And those of us who are Christians, we know that you have to leave some things behind, things that you were actually practicing, right? And which formed sometimes poor aspects of their lives. You have to leave that. And some people cry when they realize that they've got to put away the vices that they had in their lives. And slavery, I know it was a vice, right? Slavery was a human voice. It was vice rather. It was almost like a drug that they could not have resisted, right? Because it really generated humongous, enormous amounts of profit, right? Now, Donald Trump represents now the people in the world who, and in America specifically, who are angry at what is happening with this free market um, globalization, right? In which people are suffering. You have these foreign companies, right? These wealthy billionaires, and they're not only foreign companies, they're also local companies, right? And they, want cheap labor because they want to generate lots of money. And you'd be surprised some of the statistics that Edward Luce has outlined in his book, Retreat in Western Liberalism, about the increase in terms of the billionaire class and the amount of money that they have generated since the era of globalization, right? They have become wealthier, while the middle classes and the working classes have become poorer, right? And I need you to understand that. So a lot of times when we see, things being made and constructed, people like to see big buildings going up and they think that's a sign of progress, right? So new hotels, new businesses, new restaurants, right? New schools, new universities, and we think that that is progress, right? But if you are not having the middle class and their, per capita income increasing, then that is not going to, you're retreating. You are actually retreating, you're regressing, right? When you look at the middle class, particularly in Western society, should be the hallmark of progress. And if they're not progressing, right? If they're totally indebted, in huge debt, then that is not human progress. No matter how many, high-rise buildings, right, that you want to see in your city being constructed with modern facilities, right? It doesn't mean that you are a prosperous nation, right? It means that you are treating, because what people should see is that they should see an expansion of the middle class, because each successive generation wants to see life better, or should be seeing life better for his or her generation. And that would be the sign or the hallmark of prosperity, right? Or of an economy that is progressive. Other than that, if you are seeing the poor getting poorer and the rich getting richer, it means therefore that we are in retreat, right? We are regressing, irrespective of the measly and the modest improvements that you cite as a result of, and say that we're moving on. We're not moving on, right? Don't fool yourselves, right? That's the message that the elites want us to have. So we have these frustrated base, Donald Trump's base, right? Which really, if the truth be told, is most of America, right? And what is happening is that the Democrats, for the most part, are delusional in the United States, that is. They are delusional, and they think that somehow the government is going to secure them and their offspring, right? Prosperity. And that prosperity will come from the government. The government is doing everything to bring green jobs and other types of jobs, and they listen to these statistics given by the central bank, right? And they think that that is true, right? And as Edward Luce says that, is you have one thing to have a nation's, the nation is going through recession, right? So we have a national recession. That means that terminology, right? And another thing is to have a personal recession. And many of us have been going through personal recessions from ever since we were born, right? It's one thing for the economy to grow by 2% or 5%, and that is good for, Apple and the iPhones and the Amazons and so forth. But does that growth translate to people's lives? and their livelihoods? Are they getting better salaries, right? Have their lives improved economically, socially, right? If these things are not happening, then 5% in your growth in your economy does not matter, right? And because before the whole concept of globalization as it was projected in the 1990s, national growth meant something because it meant before that, before the outsourcing of the jobs, because these companies were there in your country, right? So whatever growth that they made, it redounded, right? It translated into the lives of its citizens, right? So if Apple grew by, if the economy grew by 5% before Apple started outsourcing its labor, then the people there, it would be able to expand, right? The businesses in the United States would be able to expand, and therefore they would be able to employ more people and at a better wage or a better salary, right? But when they're globalized, they're looking for cheap labor, the cheapest of labor on the market. So when the economy grows and they're looking at the aggregate growth, right, it does not necessarily translate to your life because it might be good for China, right? Or it might be good for the pockets of the global elites, but it's not that economic growth. That 5% economic growth is not good for your growth, for your personal growth. And we've got to understand that, right? People like the Chris Hedges has spoken about, I can't remember, I think he's from Portland, right? Maine, if I'm not lying. But he has spoken about the fact that where he has been to his home community where he grew up, and before he left, perhaps let's say that Chris Hedges might have left in the 1970s, right? You had lots of, or, what you call it now, factories there. And people were working and they were earning well. They could send their children to school, they could buy a house, they could have a nice car, etc., 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 right? Now, if you go back there, it's like a cemetery, it's a dead zone. Nothing. All of that financial infrastructure that where factories were in abundance have been decimated, right? Through the whole process of globalization. Now, these are the people that are hurting or hurting, and they're crying out to their governments around the world, including in the United States. And the government is not listening. The government tells them that you're the lazy ones and you need to become more current and learn new skills, right? Try and go online and do something. Go on TikTok and dance and make something, right? And it is an insult to those of us who have educated ourselves to see all these people on TikTok dancing and talking nonsense, right? Gyrating their bodies and earning hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? I see these pranksters on YouTube, right? And they're the ones getting the subscribers and the millions of, likes and all that stuff and making millions of dollars just to prank somebody, and people laugh and think it's entertainment, right? And some of them, you must say, are entertaining. But is that the way in which we want to see our civilization grow, right? Don't we want to see jobs being created that require great skills, right? And excellent mental capacity, right? We need to question ourselves in terms to see what we really want, the direction in which we want to see our world heading. Now, Donald Trump, as the papers are suggesting, is the major threat to democracy. But if Donald Trump is representing, and I'm not saying Donald Trump now is genuinely representing the voices, because I don't think he is genuinely representing the voices of these people who are struggling, but he is the representative, whether or not he's genuine, right? He is voicing because he has a mic at the table. We don't have the mic because we are ordinary people, so nobody's coming to our houses to to interview us and to see what's going on, right? Donald Trump has. In fact, all the media houses are for anywhere he goes, right? The media is there, right? So he has a very powerful voice, and he's using that voice, whether or not he's sincere, and it's not for us as people to ascribe motive to what people are doing, right? We can have our judgments, right? But we should not say 100% that Donald Trump is not sincere. And maybe he's not, right? I don't think he is, but the fact of the matter is that he is voicing, we cannot deny that he is voicing the levels of frustration representative in that base of people who are suffering. Now, the media houses, are looking at, we only care about damaging Donald Trump. And this was something said by, it seems to me that Nikki Haley is going to be, well, is being touted as the candidate for the the establishment for the Republican Party, right? They don't want Donald Trump for whatever reason. I don't know. I can't say why Trump is not the person that they want. He was a darling of the elites, right? During the times of before he became president, right? When he was a reality TV show, actor, whatever he was, right? He was a darling of the global elites. And then when he now decided to run for presidency and decided that he wanted to run on that populist ticket, right? Representing the ordinary Republican man or woman, then he is now, the worst enemy that America has ever seen. Something is wrong with that, right? So we have here at a rally in New Hampshire this week, Donald Trump railed against liberal efforts to infiltrate the state's upcoming Republican primary, accusing Democrats and never Trump conservatives of conspiring to elect Nikki Haley. Now, Nikki Haley definitely is a candidate of the billionaires in the Republican Party. What is happening is that they're saying that the Republican Party, is faced with a sort of conundrum at this point in time, in which you have Democrats who are not so confident in Joe Biden's capacity to be president, right? So they are undeclared in terms of who they think they want to vote for. So they're trying to allure the sort of to attract them to the base, to the Republican base, to attract these undeclared voters, the Democratic voters and the independents, right? Also to the Republican base, right? So we have, it says, on its surface, it sounded a lot like another of Trump's conspiracy-laden tirades, but in reality, the former president wasn't entirely off the mark. In recent months, a handful of left-leaning groups have popped up across New Hampshire with the goal of persuading the state's undeclared voters, who make up 42% of the voting population and are eligible to vote in either party's primary, to back Haley. Now, 42% is a whole lot of undeclared voters. What this suggests is that many of the people in the United States, including in Democratic strongholds, are not happy with what they see in American politics, right? So when they're saying that they're saved, they're, what's his name? Joe Biden is there to save America's democracy. Something is wrong because people are not happy. And if democracy was operating in the way it should, particularly America's democracy, where you have, a lot of money, right? But it's not equally distributed. And if people saw that the democracy was running as it should have been running, or it should run, then they would definitely be happy to vote, right? But you find that they're undeclared. Undeclared means that they're fed up, frustrated, and as a result of that, they do not know whom they should cast their votes for, right? I think that is very clear in this message. Now, we only care about damaging Donald Trump, said Schwartz. For better or for worse, the only thing you can do if you really want to stop Trump is to vote for Haley. So the establishment, those who are in the establishment of the Republican Party, right, they are clear that they do not want. Trump is not the guy that they want, right? And the establishment normally represents the millionaires, the billionaires, the wealthy class, right? Does not represent the ordinary man, nor the middle class, if you will, right? People think that they do, and that's why during the pandemic, some people demonstrated a certain behavior to suggest that they belong to an educated populace, right? While they were making bad decisions, right? Because these people are not necessarily representing you. And I should not use the word necessary. They are not representing you, right? So you need to understand that. I don't care if you've been to Harvard, if you've been to Yale, or if you've been to any of these elite institutions. Well, if you are part of that club, right, they might consider, right? But if you have not joined their club, then you are really, in their eyes, nobody. Now, by his own admission, Schwartz's crusade is a long shot. As of October, when New Hampshire requires voters to select their party affiliation, just 3,500 people had switched their registration from Democratic to undeclared. It will take many, many more undeclared voters to cast a ballot for Haley next week, right? So the undeclared voters are the ones who are going to determine whether or not the Republican or the Democrats take home that ticket, whether or not Donald Trump wins. It seems to me that a lot of people, because of what the media has been doing to Donald Trump and the fact that they have been slaughtering him, right? When I say slaughter, I don't mean it literal, I mean slaughtering him politically, right? And besmirching his character and the fact that has all these legal accusations and stuff like that, people are wondering why now, and also why are they after this former president, right? This is unprecedented. And the things, that he's been accused of, or some of the things I should say, are things that the billionaire class and these wealthy people do, including the banks, right? And that is what people are a little bit perturbed and are wondering what is happening in this country. Now, how much of your efforts, the question is being asked, were directed toward getting Democratic voters to switch their party affiliation to undeclared, and how much has been dedicated to persuading already undeclared voters to vote in the Republican primary for Haley? Now, listen to this response, because this is a very interesting response. I would say we made a very limited effort focused on Democrats because everyone told us that the process was too complicated and we weren't going to get Democrats to become undeclared. We spent about $2,000 to send text messages to 38,000 people, and 3,500 Democrats switched to undeclared. Our focus has been on 130,000 undeclared voters who voted in the 2020 Democratic primary because they're high propensity voters in the primaries and they can easily switch to vote in the Republican primary. We're already spent over 500,000 on undeclared voters. So they're spending their monies to convince people, right, as to whom to vote for. That is something very interesting, right? And this is something the Democratic Party in New Hampshire has come out against your strategy. What do you make of your position? They were opposed to Democrats becoming undeclared, which I understand, although almost all those undeclared voters will go back to being Democrats after this primary, when I have said that Donald Trump is an existential and unique threat to our democracy. They have repeatedly said that Chris Christie and Nikki Haley are also existential threats to the planet and to our democracy because of their positions on abortion and climate change, right? And this is something very interesting, right? Now, do you think that people have as a top priority, right, the policies of abortion and climate change on their, what you call it now, dream list of what they want to accomplish for 2024? I don't think so, right? I don't think so. I don't think abortion is going to be at the top of their list, right? Is it that 45% of Americans want abortion? Let us say women, because women are the only ones who can have abortion, right? Women, you can answer this question. That 45% among females want to have an abortion. Is that so? Is that true? That that is a top priority. Is climate change a top priority among voters? All right. Or are they talking about simple matters of feeding their families, feeding themselves and their families, right? And being able to have a decent health insurance and to be able to educate their families, their children, right? I think these are the top priorities of a majority, a significant number of Americans. I do not think that abortion and climate change are, right? But this is what the media does. It shapes, it molds, right? What they think you should think and how you should think, right? And I think you should understand that. And people will go out and they will quote what the press, what the media have said, and said that, yeah, this is what it is, right? Without even questioning the wisdom or the sense, the rationale, right? Coming from this sort of statements that the media and their conglomerates, right? Their supporters, their financial donors are suggesting. One of the things I would like to show you, and this was a poem by Martin Niemöller, and it was done, it could be perhaps after the Holocaust, right? The Jewish Holocaust. He says here, first they come for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me, right? So this is a very, very important point, right? Because we see now where they're going after Trump and his supporters, right? What you call these MAGA people, right? And you don't have to agree with the MAGA people, just like you don't have to be a communist to be fair to what's going on. And if somebody's making wrong accusations, if they're leveling wrong and erroneous accusations at the communists, at the socialists, at the trade unionists, at the Jews, right? Then we ought to defend them and say that's not true if it is not true, right? Not because we don't agree with them, should we say, okay, yeah, they should go after them because that will teach them a lesson. And we have the tendency to do that. Yeah, I don't like that, those right-wing people or those left-wing people, right? Because I don't like them. And I hope the government will discipline them. And we saw that during the pandemic, right? Those who were anti the jab, right, should have gone to the state because that's where they belonged, right? But what happens when they come for you, right? Because one day they are going, if you live long enough, they're coming for you, right? Because these are not your friends. And during the French Revolution, if you go and study that history, you will see those people who also, who were vouching for fraternity and liberty and all of those wonderful, um, you know, humanitarian objectives, wanting a free, who would want that? A system built on brotherhood and freedom and liberty, right? Who would not want that? But at the end of the day, the same people who were vouching for those, as we're vouching for diversity, equity, and inclusion, they were beheaded. I'm not laughing right now. It's serious. The same ones who were, vouching for liberty, fraternity, and liberté, right? They actually, right, were sent. They were vouching for people who did not desire to have those humanitarian objectives in our society, or human rights, as we would like to say. They said that these people should be killed, those who were against that sort of freedom and liberty and brotherhood, right? And after they vouched for that and some of these people were killed, afterwards society turned on them and killed them too, right? So what we need to understand is that our elites, the ruling elites, are the ones who are forming our judgment, and they don't care, and they're dividing us. And when they divide us, then they will conquer us, right? And Trump is a part of the elites, whether we like it or not. And I'm not sure if his base understands that, right? And we ought not to trust any politicians for that matter, right? What we should force them to do is to adhere to the tenets of the Constitution and the law. And we ought to be fair, and we ought not to accuse people and say that, oh, yeah, we need to see Trump um, penalized, right? And he should go to prison because of the accusations that we've heard until he's convicted, right? And we need to see others too who have, who are guilty of similar crimes and more, because Trump is not the most corrupt person in the United States, certainly by no stretch of the imagination, right? We are even hearing that he's not even the billionaire that he projects himself to be, right? Most of these billionaires are corrupt beings, so you need to understand that. And he's not the richest billionaire, in the United States, right? By any stretch of the imagination, right? So the fact of the matter is that he cannot be an existential threat to the United States democracy, right? The United States sits on top of a humongous military apparatus, right? And he would have to untangle, right, that military apparatus and destroy it and have them side with him for him to be an existential threat or a serious threat to America's democracy. And I don't think that the military industrial complex would be siding with Trump. Maybe have a minute element, I'm just thinking here, but I don't think that the significant portion of the US military would be siding with Trump anytime soon. And, who controls the military industrial complex? But the global elites, right? And we're seeing where the local and global elites do not favor Trump. If you open the BBC newspaper, if you open the Gleaner in Jamaica, if you open the Listing Diario in Santo Domingo, if you open just about any left-wing or left-leaning newspaper organization or institution, you will see that they are against Donald Trump. And the same stories are being peddled, right? It's almost like they're plagiarizing. They're saying the same thing about what this man is and what he is not. Now, something should jolt your thinking and say, why? Why are they going after this one politician, And not that we're defending him, because if he is guilty of some serious crimes, he should face the consequences of the law, right? But what you should be asking yourselves as intelligent people, right? And I hope that people who are on this channel, I would deem to be intelligent people who desire to think, right? You should ask yourselves the question, why Trump? And why are they waging this aggressive campaign to to prevent him from going back to the White House? These are some questions we have to ask ourselves. I'm not saying we have the answers, but this is what thinking is all about, right? To think, to question, not because you have the answers, but you must say something here is amiss, something I might be missing, something that I might not be understanding here. What is it? I don't know. And perhaps you need to do more research. And rather than sitting like a lame duck, listening to what the MSNBCs and the CNNs and the Fox News and all of these, major news stations, the New York Times and Washington Post are saying, right? And many of us, if truth be told, even with PhDs and people with their medical doctor and whatever, don't like to think. We just don't like to think. I was reading a book yesterday that Dr. Pierre Corey has written, I will not mention the name of the book. It's The War on I, right? Because of what is happening on YouTube now and the levels of censorship, right? But in that book, it's not Perry, it's Per Corey, right? He unmasked, right, the journey of his intellectual um, growth and development, right? And if Per Corey I would think he's maybe in his early 50s, right? Can humble himself, a brilliant mind, because a brilliant mind he is, right? Humble himself, understanding that most of what he thought he knew, he realizes that is either their half truths or their complete lies, right? And he has to reorient himself into learning the truth. And nothing is wrong with that. It is painful, right? And the history of Paul Marrick and Pierre Corey and their relationship and their brotherhood is fascinating. I cried when I read the book, and I'm not even finished. I think I'm on chapter, I've just begun, so I'm chapter 3 thereabout, right? And the book is fascinating, easy to read, right? He doesn't have any complex words in it that you won't grasp, right? He's a medical doctor who is recounting this very painful sojourn from his youthful years up to his now years as a mature man, right? But we have to reach the point where we question things, right? And to see how, even within his profession, people can ostracize, right? And they don't like to see withdrawal. And they are not adaptable to new information, even among very, what we would like to say, brilliant minds, right? They like to remain in that with dark minds, in a dark age where you're not constantly being enlightened, right? And this is an anti-Christian, anti-biblical, I shouldn't say anti-Christian, anti-biblical perspective, because the purpose of the Bible is for you to be learning every day. You can read the same Psalm every day, Psalm 1, and you read that Psalm every day, and every time you read it, you come out with some new insights. It is mind-boggling, right? And this is what God wants us to do in all spheres of our lives, right? Whether you're in science or you're in politics or you're in, just whatever, right? You need to be able, sometimes I reread my books, the books that I read before, because when you read them again, third, the fourth time, you are gaining insights. And because we are so flawed as human beings, there are some things that your eyes did not see. You understood it, it was something simple, but you just didn't see it. You were just, your eyes were just moving, right? And then you actually didn't pay attention to that critical aspect included in that particular tome or that volume of reading, right? So we cannot think that we know it all. Even the scientists who think that they have, this is settled science. It's not settled science, right? Because there are lots of things that you did not include and perhaps were not knowledgeable of including. But you can say that, based on what we've seen here, this is it, right? And then allow other people to look and to see if you have missed out on anything. And if you did, to humble yourself and say, well, that seems to be more thorough, right? Because we are flawed individuals. And every day we come up with new concepts and new things. So Trump is in the the news, and he is this person who is the singular and unique threat to an existential threat to US democracy and democracy around the world. Now, there is an article that was written also in the Political, and this was published on the 20th of January. So, that's 2 days ago. I did, as I mentioned, publish this, not publish, but, I made this video and just could not find it. So I've already made a video, I'm remaking it. So I'm not sure if it's going to be the better one of the two, but however it's made, thank you for accepting it, right? That's what it's all about. Now, let's go to this article, and we are going to populism keeps rattling the globe. elites have no idea what to do. So the tenet of this article, right, is that the elites who are now converged, that's the financial and political elites and scientific elites and all these types of elites, right, who are converged now in Davos in Switzerland, they are concerned about the rising populism in the world. And they're suggesting that they know that people are angry and angry at them. And one of the reasons for which they are concerned about the populism, even from both sides, from the right and from the left, because the left is suggesting that capitalism is not working and capitalism should be supplanted by some other system, I don't know, right? While the right is suggesting that all the system, people need to be skeptical of all the systems, right? Because they are not functioning, which to a large extent is true. But that rattles the minds of these global elites because then the attention will be placed on them. And they don't want the cameras to be placed on them to unmask, right? And to shed light on what they're doing, right? Because that is their, that is one thing that they're afraid of doing. But, so, and I want you to understand that what is happening in the media in terms of all these salacious, um, stories about who is doing what and who's not doing what and who's shacking up with whom and so on. All of these things are to entertain you and also to divert your attention from what is happening in the world of the elites. So they're happy. And while you are saying, well, yes, and all these people are sleeping with each other and they're doing this and they're doing that, and Donald Trump is this and Donald Trump is that, right? They are laughing at you because you are being distracted, right? Whilst being entertained. And they're showing us the most salacious and the most despicable acts of human beings, right? I want you to understand that because at the same time also, it is destroying the moral fabric on which Western societies are built. Because even though people engage in these activities, from time immemorial, but it's not that we have glorified them. But what we're finding now is that our media are glorifying, you know, behaviors that antisocial behaviors, I should say, amongst our politicians. So our politicians are no longer respectable beings, right? They're just beings who behave like prostitutes, right? Yeah, that's what we're seeing in the media from almost every day. Now, in conversation after conversation here, that's in Davos, Switzerland, I detected resignation and helplessness among business executives when it came to their counterparts in government. There's a desperate desire to see the world's political leaders appeal more to moderates instead of capitalizing on extremes. But there's also recognition that the political market doesn't easily reward the people in the middle. So when we say middle now, they just want you to agree with what they're telling you. Moderates mean that you go along with the status quo. That's what it means, right? It doesn't mean you're balanced, right? And some people think that they're balanced because they are in the middle, right? This is not being moderate and being in the middle does not mean that you are an objective thinker. It just means that because you have to decide one day. Right now, it's either between what is right or what is not right. There's no middle ground as we see it now. Once you've lost freedom of speech, which we are essentially losing every day, there is no middle ground, right? It is either you are in the dark or you are in the light. And you've got to understand that. Because just as the guy here said, they came for what? The socialist, right? And because I wasn't a socialist, I didn't speak up for them, right? Then they came for the trade unionist. And because I wasn't a trade unionist, I didn't speak up for them. Then they came for the Jews, right? And I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't speak up for them. And then they came for me. And there was no one left, right? So eventually they are going to come for you and you will have to make a determination in terms of where you stand. Are you on the right or are you on the left? And I'm not saying politically now. This has to do with your conscience. It's eventually going to be morphed into a religious decision, whether you are for God or you are anti-God. And we can see where that is going, right? That it is, morphing into this religious sentiment, right? The WEF's Global Risks Report 2024, which we shall look at in another video, made it clear that social fractures are a widespread worry. Respondents listed societal and or political polarization in the top three concerns behind number two, artificial intelligence generated misinformation and disinformation, and number one, extreme weather. So extreme weather is number one, artificial intelligence generated disinformation and misinformation, and the societal and political polarization are the top three concerns of our world, not poverty. Look at the sky, right? Right? Look at the sky. Incredible. Now, this is what is interesting, that they determine what you should be concerned about and not the things that you know are concerning in your lives, right? The global elites tell you what the world or what talks of this. And number two is misinformation. So they can tell you what to believe in and what not to believe in, right? Particularly if it's going to cause, ruption and divisions, fractures in the society. Okay, hope you're taking stock of that particular point, right? Among those warning Trump against putting up trade barriers is Jeremy Hunt. So Trump wants to put up trade barriers. He wants nations to go back to their system of nationalism, and that's the whole matter of the populist agenda, to go back to nationalism. That's not going to happen, by the way, because we're too far into this globalized indoctrination economic framework. Now, it would be a profound mistake to move back to protectionism, he said in Davos when asked about a possible Trump return, right? It's impossible, and they won't allow that to happen. And the world is so interconnected now. It's almost like you are going through cancer and you're at the stage 4 cancer. Only a miracle will heal you from that stage 4. I'm not saying you can't be healed, and probably I shouldn't say that, but the fact of the matter is now, with this whole interconnected global economy and the fact that these guys have made lots of money, they are not going to go back to a system in which they would have to conform with national laws and, and also to pay these local people more money. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Right? Unless we wage a fight like civil war and fight against the system, right? And what happened in during the French Revolution, and we saw during the French Revolution that, a lot of blood spilled and the system did not really change that much, right? So this is what we have to take stock. We've got to begin to understand that Donald Trump is not the major threat to Western democracy, as they are saying. The people are, right? And the people whom Donald Trump represents, right? They are the major threats to Western democracy. And by threats, I mean they are challenging. I should use the word threat, the major challenge to Western democracy. They understand that this system that we find ourselves in is not going to lead us to liberation, not liberalization, but liberation, freedom, right? They realize that the constitutional principles on which the United States was founded, right, is now beginning to be shredded. Or I should say, are now beginning to be shredded, right? So they are waging a war. However, the media, have been aggressive at waging a response campaign against them. And these people, whether you like it or not, whether you think they're angry or not, represent the common working class and middle class people and their sentiments. If truth be told, the only thing is that they have the courage to do it, right? While you hide behind a wall of intellectualism, spurious intellectualism, believing that no, these people are just MAGA people, they're stupid, they don't have sense, they're religious, and they're fools. And I'm not agreeing with everything that the MAGA people are saying. But if you read what the sentiments are, you realize that people in the global south, in the United States, people in the global north who are suffering in these Western economies. These are the sentiments shared by them. Only that, as I've said before, they do not have the courage to articulate these sentiments, right? So we need to take stock. We need to be able to do more research, to investigate, to be our own journalists, right? Read as extensively as we can and speak to people who are intelligent. And intelligence doesn't mean that you have a degree, right? Because so much time people who have degrees are people who I don't want to communicate with because they lack an understanding of the world. They're so caught up into some theory that they themselves don't even understand, right? So we need to be able to form groups, right? Reading clubs, and where we can discuss, right? Important matters, important issues of concern, so that we'll be able to understand, to comprehend, and to be able to dissect everything that we see happening or we witness or we're witnessing in the political world. Thank you so much for joining. I look forward to seeing you in another chat. Have a fantastic day with you.